What's up, everyone? Welcome back for a brand new edition of Collider Dailies. John, we got a heavy lineup today. It's a big lineup.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff here. Before we dig into all of these big intense stories, tell me something good. What's something good in your life today? Something that happened yesterday? Brighten my mood, man.
I feel like I am finally getting my sleep schedule in a normal way.
I feel like a lot of people out there don't know how significant that is for you. I am so happy to hear that.
Yeah, it's been a conscious effort of mine over the last few weeks to kind of get myself into more of a normal human like schedule, because before I was sort of accidentally doing, I forget what the term is for, there's a specific like sleep schedule where you sleep for like a couple hours, then you're up, then you sleep for a couple hours and up. I was kind of unintentionally in that schedule, and now I'm like, okay, I want to get back to where I'm sleeping at night and I'm awake during the day. And I'm not 100% in a good spot there, but I'm getting closer. I slept for about 6 hours last night,
Very
which
nice.
is a block of time that I almost never get to do.
That's the
So
thing. It's baby steps.
yeah,
Baby steps in the right direction, which is what it sounds like is happening right now. I'll add that today will be a good day because after this, I am off to record 2 episodes of Collider Ladies Night that I'm quite excited about. I think everyone's going to be very happy when they hear who the guests are. So
that
that's
is
my day.
always great to hear.
Thank you.
Love ladies
Thank
night.
you. And now on to our first not so good topic of the day. Probably a lot of people out there can imagine this subject matter makes me very sensitive and sad for a multitude of reasons. But the reason why we have this headline today is because of a recent THR article that has sparked some of these conversations. This is a THR article. There is no confirmation that this is indeed the plan. And I'll eventually get into the fact that the word reboot can mean a multitude of things. But I do want to begin by pointing out the paragraph of this particular article that has started this conversation and, it's kept it going quite strongly on social media right now. So in this article, they say, while some insiders say the situation is shambles and very raw, it may not be as dire as it might seem. Scream has always had interchangeable villains behind the mask, ensemble cast, and certain legacy characters. Another reboot will not fatally stab the franchise. Christopher Landon remains on board as director, as does James Vanderbilt, who co-wrote the previous 2 installments. So clearly, the spicy line right there is another reboot will not fatally stab the franchise. I don't like the idea of any kind of reboot here. But before even giving my take on a potential reboot, just, a few important things to point out. And a big one being the situation is still raw and very much evolving. And then on top of that, the word reboot has come to mean many different things. For example, Scream 2022 was a reboot, but it existed within the world of the previous films, whereas let's say 2019, I think it was 2019, the 2019 Child's Play movie, that was a complete reboot that existed outside of the narrative that the main franchise focuses on. So there's 2 completely different paths whenever you suggest reboot, if not more, that I'm not thinking of right now. But the point being, of the ones that I just named right there, I don't think either of them would work for the Scream franchise at this stage because I worry about this, and I'm trying to find words that don't sound like I'm blowing this out of proportion right now. But a complete reboot, I think, would be kind of offensive. And this is a very, very passionate fan base, clearly one that I'm very much a part of, that suddenly and shockingly had a successful and beloved iteration of the series ripped away from them in a flash. And I'm willing to bet that they will not show up for a total reboot, which would completely obliterate the value of continuing the franchise. And, also to back that up, while the Scream TV series that was on MTV did eventually grow on me, I did come to like it, and then they ripped that away by rebooting that. but ultimately they rebooted it because it didn't do very well, or at least not as well as they would have liked, not as well as the existing film franchise. I love Scream. You don't need me to say that anymore to convince you of it. And I'm always going
Gee,
to
this
want.
is news to me. I couldn't tell
Yeah,
that you love
really.
Scream.
That
I
should
didn't
have been
know
the
that.
headline. Perri loves Scream. But as much as I love Scream, I I don't want to see it go either reboot path. And I think at this point, all I can really think of, and again, my opinion might change as the situation evolves, as we get more information, maybe more concrete information from the studio, and we're not just speculating. But my thought right now is leave it alone for a period of time until a better solution is found. I don't know what that solution is at this point, and it really does break my heart, but we need time. We need a breath.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I think that is the way forward that I would like to see, is them not necessarily like going for a hard reboot this quickly. Just let it mellow, let it sit for a while. You know, horror franchises, especially slasher franchises, kind of have this reputation of being very reboot heavy. I mean, my favorite franchise is Halloween, so that literally like that series' entire like gimmick is that they reboots every other movie. So like it's too, like, honestly, it is a little bit surprising to me that Scream hasn't had a hard reboot yet in its history. But on the flip side, like, that's almost like just part of the series, is the fact that it is an ongoing narrative, kind of, to a certain degree. Obviously we have different Ghostface, but we have the same legacy characters coming in all the time. I think that it's in a situation right now. It's in very, very turbulent waters. So it's not the kind of thing where they can really just, they can't approach it in as like straightforward of a manner as some other series might. And yeah, you are correct that the Scream fan base is unique when it comes to horror films, and they're going to care a lot more if it is a hard reboot. So yeah, sitting on it is probably the way to go. Let it, let Scream kind of take a break for, maybe 5 years or so, and
Well,
just,
I I
kind of
think
let things go.
I think the difference between Scream and many other slasher franchises is Scream has never veered away from where it started ever. And really, because I just brought up Child's Play, that was a similar thing. I did not like that reboot. I thought that movie was pretty okay. I mean, not the greatest thing in the world, not bad. It was fine, and I enjoyed myself watching it. But it was just so weird to me when that movie came out, and the existing franchise that has been running for many years, it was still going strong. It was still
Yeah.
working, and then they threw that movie out there, and there wasn't all that much interest in it. Versus, let's say, Halloween, Friday the 13th, Texas Chainsaw. I feel like a lot of those movies are able or more likely to successfully go down the reboot path, again, whatever we really mean by reboot, because they've done it before. I'm a little more open-minded because the foundation that they stand on has already justified that that's an option and conditioned me to accept it, maybe, versus Scream, where everything is rooted in the beginnings of Sidney Prescott in Woodsboro and what happened with her family and how that sparked all of this. It's You don't have the same options here. And again, as someone who's been part of this fan base for almost her entire life, who has met so many, interacted with them face to face, the passion is just through the roof, and so is the dedication. And I do think if anything is perceived to go against what people have fallen in love with since 1996, that they are going to turn their backs and walk away. And if we want to look at this as a business, which everyone out there knows, I always prefer art over business, but it is a business. And the second that your hardcore fan base turns your back, your business plan is obliterated. There you go.
Yeah, it's a tough spot. And as you pointed out, yes, Scream is very unique in this genre, in this area. I will say though that I feel like the Scream series, like as far as the Sidney Prescott, story, the story that they've been telling since the 90s, I feel like Scream 5 and 6 honestly left that story in a good place. And if it does wind up being the end of that story, I feel like that's not a bad ending. It's not like some franchises that reboot where it's like, okay, but the storyline that you had before didn't get to resolve. I feel like it's in a spot where if Scream 6 was called the end of that like timeline, I think that it's at least a cohesive enough complete story that it can lie as an ending at
You
that point, at
had
least
you
for me.
had me open-minded until you used the word timeline. What do you mean by timeline?
So again, as a Halloween fan, I kind of think of things in terms of timelines. I just mean like that particular story, that particular continuity. If that is where it ends, I think that's fine, at least to me. Again, I'm not a hardcore Scream fan. I actually only just saw Scream 5 and 6 like literally like a week ago. So they're very fresh in my mind, and again, I'm not the biggest most hardcore Scream fan, so my opinions on this are going to be probably a little bit different than yours.
I mean,
um
but that's not to say that opinion isn't valid, because right
yeah.
now, I mean, that's what this is. I'm speaking for the hardcore fans, let's say, and again, if the hardcore fans turn their backs on the franchise, I do think that's a problem
Oh,
for the
100%.
the film franchise financially. But so is the this is always what I talk about with franchises. Yes, I always want a new installment of a franchise to satisfy and make the pre-existing fan base happy. But if a franchise doesn't open itself up to people who aren't considered hardcore fans, or maybe are just flat out newcomers, you're also going to wind up stopping yourself dead in your tracks and not growing enough to justify budgets and things like that. That is something that I think Scream had just done exceptionally well. They did what so many franchises can't do. They use legacy characters to fill the hearts of people like me who have been in love with the big three since 96. And then they introduced a whole group of newcomers who introduced a younger generation to this franchise that so many of us have loved our entire lives. They hit that perfect balance. Now that perfect balance has been rocked. This is why I'm not a writer. As much as I love this franchise, as well as I think I know it, I don't have a good story idea for how to fix the situation. And I don't envy Jamie Vanderbilt for having to figure out what to do now, because stuff is a mess, and stuff is a mess on so many different levels.
Yeah, it is an exceptionally rough spot, and it is something I do not envy anybody who is involved with it right now, because especially because the nature of just the way that things have kind of rocked out.
Mm.
It's a very raw situation, and it's going to be tough to navigate, because regardless of what they put out, it is going to be under scrutiny that it wouldn't have had otherwise. So again, maybe there's an argument there for just letting it sit and letting it be dormant for a while. As I said, I feel like 5 years is the bare minimum if they are going to walk away from it for a while. You've got to build up that demand. You got to build up
Mhm.
that you got to make people miss Scream.
It's
And
not
like
even.
we've
It's
had two really good movies recently, and the fan base is jazzed, but now that all of everything has happened, just walk away from it for a little bit, I think, is the best course of action.
It's not even just demand. It's also having good new material to work with. And of course, this has now become a different situation than the break from Scream 3 to Scream 4. But I've always said that one of the things that I thought really benefited Scream 4, and then ultimately Scream 5 as well, is the fact that this is a meta franchise that comments on the state of horror. The more time you have between installments, the more new trends within the genre you have have to comment on. And I do think that's a big part of the reason why each installment has always felt meaty and fresh and like it has something to say in addition to just being a very entertaining slasher movie. We will keep an eye on this situation as it progresses. Just another reminder, this conversation was sparked by a report that used the phrase, another reboot will not fatally stab the franchise. This is not concrete, confirmation that that is the plan and what they're going to do going forward. So that is where we will leave that for now. Now on to something a little more positive because it's a first look. It's a first look for a highly anticipated upcoming film. It is our first look at Anya Taylor-Joy as Furiosa, of course, who is played in Mad Max Fury Road by Charlize Theron. I am very excited for this movie. Mad Max Fury Road was my number one movie of 2015.
I am so hyped. I love the Mad Max franchise. I grew up with it. It's one of those things that like I have just such a deep, passionate love for the world and for the characters, and Fury Road was so damn good. Mm-hmm. And so getting any sort of expansion upon anybody involved with that, I'm all for. So seeing this just made me super giddy yesterday. I was all smiles.
And I feel like she's going to be the perfect fit for this role too. It is not easy to follow in Charlize's footsteps, especially with this character and in the performance that she gave in the 2015 film. But if anyone can do it, I think it's Anya Taylor-Joy. And then, of course, we need to note that Chris Hemsworth is also in the film. And apparently, reportedly, he is part of the cast as one of two powerful warlords. There's no confirmation on if he's going to play a Morton Joe, but the story of this new movie is said to offer an explanation of how a Morton Joe gained influence to rally warriors against Furiosa, as we see in Mad Max Fury Road. That I think he could be. I think he could be. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see Anya Taylor-Joy versus Chris Hemsworth. Both of them are scheduled to appear at CCXP in Brazil this week to promote the movie. So I feel like we're going to have, I don't remember specifically when their panel is, but I feel like we're going to have more information on the movie and the plot very, very soon.
Yeah, it's going to be the kind of thing where either by the end of the week or early next week, we're going to have a lot more concrete answers as far as what is going on. I think that as far as like the idea of Chris Hemsworth being a Morton Joe, I don't see as much of a straight line between Chris Hemsworth to the Morton Joe that we saw in Fury Road as I do Anya Taylor-Joy to Charlize Theron. So that I don't necessarily know if I can envision him as him. We do know from Fury Road that there used to be a lot of warlords, but a Morton Joe basically beat all of them. So maybe he's one of them. I don't know.
He could be.
It's a little odd.
He could be, but the fact that you don't see it kind of makes me even more excited, especially because I just think Chris Hemsworth is someone that has way more range to show off than we've ever seen before. And I don't know. I feel like this is me, like, I guess being more fan fiction-y now with the idea, but I just love the idea of him potentially losing himself in that role. I guess we're so conditioned to see him as, Thor, which is very charming. I'm forgetting the movie that came out. Chris Hemsworth, Miles Teller. It was a Netflix release. It wasn't great, but I did like it. And Chris Hemsworth was just like very clearly relishing the opportunity to have fun and get weird with a character. And ever since then, I'm like full blown obsessed with letting him swing big in a way that maybe we haven't seen before or haven't seen him do as much of. And this feels like an opportunity to do that.
I would very much like to see more opportunities for Hemsworth to let loose, as you say, to go a little wild, to go outside of the Thor action hero box. I feel like his two bigger franchises that he's a part of, that being obviously the MCU and then to a lesser extent the Extraction films, I feel like he's basically playing just like generic tough guy. I would very much like to see him do something more more wild and wacky, more out there. Maybe not. When I say wild and wacky, I don't mean it in like a funny way, although he is like surprisingly very funny. But seeing him play like a more villainous character who's a little bit more eccentric in a like brash, very warlord-esque way, I think could be a lot of fun. So if he does wind up being a Morton Joe, I'm on board for it. Like, don't think that I'm not. I just don't. I just mentally see a disconnect.
I get it. I get it. The entire time you were talking, my face was probably melting, trying to think of the name of the movie. I'm officially giving up. I like got hooked on the word spider. I think it's part spider. I'm gonna look it up.
I don't know. I'm really
I
bad with
covered it.
movie titles.
Spiderhead, right? That is the right
Sure.
movie? Yeah, Spiderhead.
Again, I'm really bad with movie titles. Like I struggle with them all the time too. If
There's
you
an interesting
saw
movie.
if those of you watching saw any of the behind the scenes when I'm running an episode, uh I spend a good amount of time like Googling movies that I might talk about, or Googling an actor's back catalog just so that I can remember stuff, because I'm so bad at remembering movie titles, which is
Sometimes
unfortunate
I'm
for somebody who
good.
talks about movies for a living.
Some days I'm good. Some days I'm bad, which, as everybody well knows, made me a good Schmodown player on some days and a very bad one on others. All right, our last topic of the day. Going over to some more spicy quotes. These came from Disney CEO Bob Iger. The Verge reported on this. The material comes from something called the New York Times Deal Book Summit. And what they do is they often have a roster of speakers, very famous, powerful speakers, doing interviews with Andrew Ross Sorkin. And during the chat with Bob Iger, what happened was they started to talk about the failure of the Marvels at the box office. And according to The Verge, Bob Iger did not blame the actor strike and the lack of publicity for the film's performance. He also didn't blame the hatred of the film driven by sexism, because it is led by three women. He did blame the sheer volume of content being created for making it more difficult to maintain quality, and said the Marvels was shot during, quote, COVID, and there wasn't enough supervision on set from executives. But given and then this is a comment The Verge made, given the over reliance on executive creative control is one of the things that have driven the Marvel brand to its current situation, where things are not appeasing fans as much as they once did. They labeled that a curious assessment of the situation. So yeah, Bob Iger had me. I started reading this, and when I hit the point where it said he did blame the sheer volume of content being created, I automatically filled in the next part of that sentence to be like, there's so much content out there, it's just hard for like enough things to rise to the top anymore. That would have been a fair assessment to make. There's
Yeah.
a lot of competition, whether we're talking about big screen competition, streaming competition, or them together, which is a significant amount of shows and movies to be watching. But then he goes on to say there wasn't, because of all that content and it was shot during COVID, there wasn't enough supervision on set. I don't think supervision is the issue. And I respect all opinions as long as they're expressed in a kind way. I know some people did not like the Marvels. I really liked the Marvels. I thought it was a very, very well done movie, hugely entertaining, strong character arcs, a really great group with lots of chemistry with one another. I, for the life of me, do not understand what executive supervision could have done to make it better. If anything, I think maybe taking control away from Nia DaCosta to any degree would have made it worse, because it feels to me like a cohesive vision where I think the pace, the style of action, the infusion of some comedy, but also a whole lot of heart, that felt to me like it very much came from her being the conductor. And I think that that's the only way something like this works, by having someone with a strong vision at the helm and an understanding of how to execute it. Therefore, what Bob Iger is suggesting to me would have made the movie a problem. And the movie is great. This is ridiculous.
I as I said on Twitter when I saw the movie, I didn't think that it was like earth-shatteringly good or anything like that. I didn't think that it was like spectacularly well made, but it did exactly what I needed it to do, which was it was fun. And I completely agree with you that I feel like like any more fingers in that pot, so to speak, might have actually stopped it from being as much fun as it was. I think that the movie's biggest problem, and I think the only thing that any sort of executive oversight might have changed for the better, although I feel like they probably would have just changed it for the worse, is I feel like the Marvels suffers from being in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, meaning that it feels like there are these connections to what's going on in the larger universe. Universe, that's a thing.
I'm going to start saying that now. Watch
Sure.
out.
There are all these connections to the wider universe and all this setup for future films that I feel like muddies the movie more than it needed to be. And the fact that the marketing leading up to the release almost seemed to shift to, hey, watch this movie for the mid credits. I feel like that's what hurt the film, not any lack of supervision from Kevin Feige or who else would have potentially been paying attention to it. I don't know. I feel like that's a Marvel problem across the board right
Yeah,
now.
I'll disagree on some of that, just in terms of I thought the movie did a really good job of giving people who haven't watched, let's say, the Disney Plus series or even Captain Marvel in a while, a good like download of the necessary information to enjoy this particular story. And I also thought that the post-credit scenes, without spoiling them, of course, I thought that they were some of the MCU's best recently, and I think it's because they tee up something exciting but also something that's directly backed by what these characters had just been through. So I think that was done very, very well. I forget the other point that I was going to make. There was like another larger point that wasn't just saying I have a different opinion than you on this matter.
You know what? Sometimes that is a valid enough point to be making, especially
Thank
on an
you.
episode of Dailies. Perri, there is nothing wrong with sitting here on this show and being like, John, you're wrong. That's the whole statement. It's just you're wrong. And I'm
Well,
just like,
no,
okay,
no,
cool.
it's not. No, it's not. You're wrong. It's I feel differently about
I
this
know.
thing.
I'm
But
teasing you, Perri.
I should.
If I'm not teasing you, I'm not doing my job.
Well, I should also be fair to this, because earlier when I read that little bit about the Marvels and said I filled in the next part of the sentence in another way, there's another little bit that I caught on the Verge where it was Bob Iger talking more generally about recent Disney flops, and his quote on that matter is, "We need to get more realistic about what a hit looks like in the streaming age." The Disney CEO also says it was a definite mistake to increase output for streaming, and that increase in quantity led to diluted quality. That all right. He lost me again at the end of that sentence. I do think that the increase in output, particularly on streaming, has completely reshaped the industry in a way where it's making it extremely difficult, possibly too difficult to make hits. I think applying the led to diluted quality broadly is probably inaccurate. I think maybe in some cases, maybe some projects out there weren't given the time and attention and maybe the resources that they needed because everything was so spread out. But I also do think that the increase in material has led to a lot of really great films and shows out there, possibly ones that we wouldn't have seen if the slates were as narrow as they were before. So I think there's two sides to that particular idea.
Yeah, I get behind the first bit of his statement in that, like, we need to rethink how we view what is a hit and what is not in the current age, because things are different. We can't necessarily just go off of what is the opening weekend box office numbers look like. Does that make a film a success or not? That's been the
Who knows
barometer
anymore?
for so long now that it's hardwired for us to look at that. But it's whenever I think about a situation like this, I think about the movie The Chronicles of Riddick, which I know is old, but bear with me for a second. That is a movie
you're
that
gonna bring up today.
that is a movie that hard flopped in theaters. Hard flopped. Like nobody saw that movie in theaters. Nobody. And if you say you saw it in theaters, you're one of like 3 people. Like nobody saw it in theaters. But it's home movie like performance, basically everybody bought it or rented it. So it did super well after the fact and was a hit because of that. That is an example of, it's an old example, obviously, because the industry has changed. Now we have streaming and things of that nature. But we need to be able to think in terms of the long term, think in terms of like what movies have legs, because it's not always a case where a movie is going to make all of its money back in the first weekend. Some things are just going to be slow burns, and that's just that is a reality of the industry that people need to be more comfortable acknowledging.
Oh, I could go down that talking topic path for a long time.
Should I sit here and talk about The Artist? And
we can't, though. I literally have to race out the door to go do an interview. we have gone too long today, so we are going to table this conversation. But there's no doubt, given this is shaping the industry that we all love so much, that we're going to be revisiting it quite often. So I am going to say thank you to everybody out there for watching this edition of Collider Dailies. Hit the comment section with your own thoughts on these topics. We love to hear them. And stay tuned. We will see you tomorrow for a brand new edition of the show.